Hey students, so in today's lessons we're going to be talking about the fallacies of relevance and the fallacies of presumption and the fallacies of clarity as our three major categories of fallacies. Now this is something that we reviewed before spring break, and so I just want you to remember that as we sort of start off our particular lesson today, we're going to talk about these three categories and then sort of specify the fallacies of clarity because that's the category that we're in right now. So remember, there are three major categories of fallacies. The first one is relevance. And remember, relevance is sort of, is the argument relevant? You're asking the question, is the argument relevant? Okay, and then the second category that we're talking about and have talked about this year is the category of presumption. And the presumption category is the argument assuming something? Okay, is the argument assuming? All right, and specifically, I totally spelled assuming wrong. Hold on. Is the argument assuming something, but not just anything, but something illegitimate? Okay, something illegitimate, meaning something that is not legit, not legitimate. Okay, so we've got relevance, we have presumption, and then the third category that we've talked about is clarity. The category of clarity. And remember, this is the question of, is the argument clear? Is the argument clear? Okay, now in these three categories that are asking these three questions, right? We're really asking an overarching question, which is, what is the issue at hand? Okay, what is the issue at hand? Now, as we move through, sort of asking this question, what is the issue at hand? That's going to be very, very helpful to us as we identify different fallacies that are being committed, because you're basically just asking, okay, is there something wrong here? And if I do feel like there is something wrong, can I identify what that is, right? So if something in the argument gives you an off feeling or makes you feel as if it's being misused or it's being exaggerated or it's being assumed or it's being abused or those sorts of things, then we're definitely going to be looking at these three categories. We're going to be looking at relevance, presumption, or clarity. And so you can look back at your notes previously to look at the different fallacies that we've talked about, and especially the category of relevance and the category of presumption. But I want us to be very, very specific today on the fallacies of clarity. So we're looking at the fallacies of clarity, and some of this will be a review to you because we talked already about the fallacies of clarity. But these are arguments. Okay, these are arguments that fail, which is why it's a fallacy. So they are arguments that fail because, all right, they contain words, phrases, or syntax that distort or cloud their meanings. Okay, so arguments that fail because they contain words, phrases, or syntax, and very important word, that distorts. Okay, distorts or clouds their meaning. Okay, now the reason why distort is sort of the word that I'm choosing in this particular case to point out is because distorts, right, means that you are making something look or appear not as it was intended. Okay, so if you're distorting something, it means that you're sort of shifting the meaning, you're sort of changing the meaning. And so if you do that within argumentation, then people are going to be really confused, right? Because they're not going to know what you're talking about, or they're going to think you're talking about something different than what you actually are talking about. And so this sort of distortion is really, really frustrating at times. The first sort of type of kind of the key, not type of, but sort of the key understanding for this particular group of fallacies we talked about was the idea of ambiguous words. Okay, so ambiguous is sort of the key term or phrase for this particular group of fallacies. Okay, so for this particular group of fallacies, we're going to be looking at the sort of the unclear terms. And ambiguous just means unclear. All right, and so when words are unclear, we call them ambiguous. All right, when words are unclear, we call them ambiguous. Ambiguous words can be open or kind of to two or more interpretations. So that's unclear and it's two or more interpretations. Okay, so you automatically know, okay, if ambiguous words are being used where there are more than one interpretation of that word, then we're going to be asking the question as good students is to say, you know what interpretation do you mean? So a really, really good debater or a really, really good argument given by a good debater is going to be very clear, and it's not going to wander about and be ambiguous. It's not going to, rather it's going to get to the point. And so within that, the first sort of fallacy that we talked about was the fallacy of equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation. This is the first fallacy of clarity. Okay, the fallacy of equivocation. And this is an argument that fails because a key term is ambiguous. So these are arguments that fail because a key term is ambiguous. And again, so that would mean, right, that it is unclear and multiple interpretations. Okay? So remember we talked about before spring break the example of this, which is a silly one, but all stars are in orbit in outer space. The actor Miley Cyrus is a star, therefore Miley Cyrus is in orbit in outer space. Well, obviously these are two different types of stars, right? And the fallacy of equivocation means I'm going to use this word star and sort of switch around, right, the subject for that meaning, right? So I'm going to say a star that's in outer space is equivalent, all right, to a star like Miley Cyrus, who's a celebrity, right? Those are two different types of stars. Therefore, right, we're creating committing the fallacy of equivocation. By using that, because we are not being clear and we're using ambiguous terms. We have distorted or clouded the meaning. Okay, the second fallacy underneath this particular group of fallacies is called accent. Accent. All right, and I don't mean accent like I have an accent that makes it difficult for you to understand, but rather this is an argument that rests on an improper emphasis. Okay, so this is arguments that rest on an improper emphasis. Okay. Placed on certain words or phrases. Okay, so arguments that rest on an improper emphasis. Okay, so the key here is improper emphasis. All right, so an improper emphasis in particular, right, what are we talking about when we say an improper emphasis? It means that I am maybe resting on certain words like really or great or huge or something like that, where I kind of distort, right, the purpose. So an example of that would be if a son and a dad were talking and the son said something like, "Dad, I want to buy a computer." Which is a totally reasonable thing to say, but then the son says this to kind of sort of over-exaggerate what's sort of happening. He says, "It's really fast." Okay? Has great graphics. Okay? A huge monitor. And a lot of memory. Okay, so you'll notice that in this particular example, right, there is emphasis being laid on really fast, great graphics, huge monitor, a lot of memory, right? The focus is that the son is really trying to say, I not only do I want this computer, but I need this computer because it is really great, huge, a lot, right? Those sorts of words sort of begin to distort, right, the argument that the son is making. He's sort of putting more emotionalism into it rather than this sort of logical way of saying, "You know what, Dad, I really need a new computer, or I really want to buy this new computer because I need a computer that's fast, and this one's really fast," right? That's different than being like, "I really want this computer, it's really fast, it's great graphics, huge monitor, a lot of memory." That's sort of over-exaggerating in a sense, or what we would call an improper emphasis. Okay, that's what we would call an improper emphasis, where there is an emphasis placed on certain words or phrases to sort of distort or bring about an emphasis so that there's some sort of appeal, right? And this is what we call accent. Okay, and so the third particular fallacy that we're talking about in terms of the fallacies of clarity. Okay, the third one is called distinction without a difference. All right, distinction without a difference. Right, and you almost even hear the fallacious intent here in number 3, distinction without a difference, because whenever we're looking at this, we know that this is sort of like, there is, you're seeking to make a distinction, but there's really not a difference between what you're trying to be distinct about, right? So these are arguments, okay, that make a linguistic distinction between two things that are actually not different from each other. Okay, so arguments that make a linguistic distinction between two things that are actually not different from each other. Okay, so this is where we sort of see the actual fallacy of it. We're talking a linguistic distinction, right? Similar to the accent, but this is more about the distinction between these things. So let me give you an example. Here we go. Somebody says, "It is not that I don't like her. Uh-oh. Here we go. This person says, I just think she is miserable. And a hateful person. Okay, so they're making a distinction, but without a difference, right? Oh, no, it's not that I don't like her. I just think she's miserable and a hateful person, right? Well, that's definitely a distinction, but it's not different, right? It's not different. Here's another example, okay? Here's another example. He's not really a bully. Okay, he's not really a bully. He just enjoys beating people up. He's not really a bully. He just enjoys beating people up. All right, this is absolutely distinction without a difference, okay? These two examples are so obvious in a sense, right, as to be humorous. And indeed, this kind of fallacy is often used, to make jokes or that sort of thing. And so that's sort of the thing that we need to look for, right? But ultimately, we need to see that in this particular fallacy, right, there's sort of this origin, okay? There's this origin, and then there's a difference between the other fallacies of clarity that we need to recognize, right? The origin is that this is an argument that fails due to lack of clarity. So the origin is a lack of clarity, right? But the difference between this fallacy and the other fallacies is that these arguments rest on distinctions, right? Resting on distinctions. All right, distinctions that don't represent real differences. Okay? All right, so that's sort of the origin and then the difference there as well. Okay? All right, so that's sort of our lesson for today. You can go back through and feel free to take a look at these multiple times. You're going to have a couple of assignments alongside of this, including a response paper. So just go ahead and look at the Google Classroom assignment, and you'll be good to go. Okay? All right, guys, we'll talk to you later.